Tov, Shavua Tov. Today's daf is daf Samach and Avodah Zorah, as we learn for Achenu basis on Masun Basar Bashivya. Amar Papa, we're at the end of the sixth line on that page on daf Samach Amarav. Amar Papa, Obikuchav Madonna. Let's say a goy. We'll use that word a goy. When we say goy, we only mean Obikuchavim, because as we see in this chart that I just handed out, now maybe I'll send it on the email also. When we say a goy, today in the Western society, we don't really have the Avodah Zarah per se, so maybe the rules are a little bit more lenient, and therefore we're pretty much makbid that if any goy touches the wine or comes in contact with the wine, we wouldn't drink the wine. But it's not really osur b'hana. We're not talking about really Avodah Zarah here. In any case, here the Gemara is talking about a real Avodah Zarah. Let's say he's pouring from the barrel v'Yisrael kuba, and the Jew is holding the beaker. He's pouring. So what's really happening here? The guy is pouring from the barrel. When he's pouring, that's mixing the wine, stirring the wine. Chamra aser. It's also, Rashi says, even bahana. You can't even have it. Remember, there's three stages: aser bahana or mutar bahana, but you can't mutar bahana, but you can't drink. Or you can even drink it if you're makel all the way. So here he says aser bahana. My time kikasi because it's coming from the power, from the direct power of the guy, meaning he's pouring the barrel. He's pouring from the barrel. So there you could say, if it's and he might have kavana, right? He's having kavana to make it a yain nesach. Therefore, say it's asur b'hana. Rashi says, so it's mashma. We don't really know for sure. Again, all these cases, you don't know for sure that he was menasach the wine, that he stirred the wine for Avodah Zarah, but we have to make that assumption, and therefore it's asur b'hana. Let's say the other way around. Yes, Yisrael Adana. Let's say the Jew is pouring from the barrel. The Jew is pouring from the barrel into the beaker, and the guy is holding the beaker. Then Chamashari, because if the beaker is not being moved, then the guy is right there. He's not stirring. You can even drink it. Shari means it's mutter even to drink it. If he mets that's but if the guy who's holding the beaker into which the wine is being poured tilts it a little bit, that means he can be stirring it. Then asur. And Rashi says, it's asur because he's shaking it. He's shaking it. And first Rashi says we're speaking about a beaker that's full. So the concern is that maybe he touched it. He touched it, that he could be stirring it with his finger. Another lashon Rashi says even if the beaker is not full, since he's shaking bekavana, it's tavileh koch bekavana v'asur b'shtia. He drink it. Again, you could have a na, according to this is mashma, dasur b'shtia. When he says dasur b'shtia, presumably you could have a na from it. So different, if the guy is pouring it directly, it's mashma, then it's asur b'hana. If he's receiving it in the beaker, but he might be shaking it, then we're more makel. He's only asur to drink it, but you could have a na from it. Amar Papa, I have a kachavim dedori zika. Let's say a guy is carrying a leather thermos, like a leather a leather bottle where you kept wine in it, and it's tied up. It's sealed up. It's tied up because of Yisrael Chorei, and the Jew is walking behind him to make sure that he doesn't touch the wine. In other words, the guy's got the wine thermos on his back, right? It's like they had leather thermoses in those days. They didn't have plastic or whatever. They made them out of skin, out of hide. So this leather canteen, you can actually call it a canteen, had wine in it, and it's sealed. And the Jew is walking behind to make sure he doesn't touch it. Malia, if the canteen is full, shari, then it's mutter. Why? Because the guy didn't touch it, and it's full, so you can't shake it. There's nothing to shake. It's absolutely full. It's like you buy these bottles of water from May Aiden or something. It's full to the very top. You can't shake it, right? Because you can't shake it. Chasira, but if let's say this leather canteen is not full, it's partially empty, then also dilma kashish, because then it's also because maybe he's shaking it. Okay, that's the first opinion here. Kuba, let's say you've got this beaker, or it's like a smaller container, but it's not a leather thing. It's like it's like made out of klicheres. It's a kind of earthenware vessel. If it's full malya osir. You're afraid that maybe if he's holding it and it's full, he might touch it. Just put his finger in at the top. Chaser, but if it's missing some, if it's not full, then shari dilanaga, because he could tell he's not touching it. He's not touching the wine. Again, the Jew is behind him. He could tell that he's not touching it. Rav Ashi Amar, In other words, if it's full, it could be that he touched it even as he picked it up or something. But if it's not full and you can see that he didn't touch it, then it's mutter. Rav Ashi Amar Zika, when it comes to a leather canteen, bein malyu bein chaser, whether it's full or half empty, if it's partially empty, it's anyway mutter shari. My time that's not the way they normally menasach. When they menasach wine, they go to an avodah zara. Somebody said before, sometimes they do it in front of avodah zara. We'll see if it's only in front of avodah zara, even not in front of avodah zara, but they stir it l'shem the avodah zara, and holding it in a leather canteen on his back and shaking it, that's not the way they're menasach the wine. Therefore, he says if it's a closed container, then it's definitely not yayin nesach, and you're allowed to drink it. If it's a closed container, if it's open, then it's like we said before. If it's open and he may have touched it without you noticing it, then you have to be concerned, and it's also. But if it's half empty and you can tell he didn't touch it, then it's mutter.
So why pour it from the barrel into a kos? Would it be usher?
If the guy,
but that's not the way they worship.
That's right. But when it was directly from his hand and it was open, so as he poured it, that was a way of stirring it.
But he just said, the Lord just said that that's not the way they.
No, what I do when it's a closed container. When it's a closed canteen, it's sealed. The canteen is.
That's not the way of worshiping.
That's how they. Sometimes they worship it with the open also, just pouring it. Pouring it is also worshiping it. But he's saying when it's not there, it's when it's closed. When it's a closed container and you can't see the wine, they don't worship it that way. That's how they do it. Okay. Matzra zaira. Matzra zaira means a wine press, like a vat, that was not. They didn't step on it. They didn't trod the wine. They didn't tread on the wine from the upper level by the press, but rather they only did it with the beams. They only pressed on the grapes with the beams. So Rav Papi Shari. Rav Papi says that you're allowed to drink that wine, right? He says you're allowed to drink that wine. Rav Ashi v'temer of Shimi Barashi also. He said you can't drink the wine. Bekocho, if it's directly, meaning he stepped on the wood, the timber, or maybe the planks that were pressing on the grapes, then kuliyama lo pligi also. It's definitely also. So where did Rav Papi say it's mutter? Ki pligi bekoch kocho, indirect power. Meaning, let's say there was a pulley system, and he turned the wheel, which in turn turned the timber or the pole or the wood on the grapes. So that's indirect. Economy, so some the machlokis is where Papi says it's mutter. It's only if it's indirect. Economy, some say everybody agrees that if it was indirect, that would be mutter because he's not touching it and it's not his koach. Again, that's one of the things in the chart that I gave out. If you didn't get one, you'll get one afterwards. Koach means a lot. In other words, if it was with his power, and was their intent or was it just power? But power means something. It was your direct power. Here we're saying, according to the Shita, if it's indirect power, then if it's indirect and you're not touching it, everybody says, Kulam apligula to shari. Again, 3 lines from the bottom page of the Gemara. Ikanami b'koch kocho, kulam apligula to shari, keep pligi b'kocho. Machlokis is only if it was his direct power, meaning he stood on the wood, which was touching the grapes. Havdi b'koch kocho, there was a Maisa where it was even indirect power. But also Rabbi Yaakov from Nahar Pakov, from that city, he asked for even that. So he went apparently like the first Shita, like Rav Ashi, who said that what? That Bekocho Kol Yamachocho Bekocho keep Bekocho, and he went like Rav Ashi Psak, that even Koch Kocho, even indirect power, is also the Asr, and the Asr presumably Bahano, even Bahano. Okay. Again, you have the 3 stages: Asr Bahano, Mutter Bahano, but Asr to drink, or even Mutter to drink. So you have to, each case is different. Hahu Chavita, the last couple of words on Samach Hamarav. Hahu Chavita, there was a story with a barrel, the Difka that broke open, Orka. The barrel, again, when we talk about a barrel, we think of a wooden barrel. All the barrels, Rashi said it on yesterday's Daf, all the barrels in the Gemara are earthenware, what we would call earthenware jugs, I guess. They're earthenware jugs. Right, Rashi on this Daf, rather. I said it was yesterday's Daf. We covered it on yesterday's Gemara. If you look on Samach Hamaralf on today's Daf, Rashi in about the 7th, 8th line down in the narrow lines from the top of the page, Shekol Chavir Shabbat Talmud, all barrels in the Gemara Kadim Shalcherasain, they are earthenware jugs. You should know we're not talking about wood barrels that we think of when we think of a barrel. When you think of a barrel, you think of a wooden barrel, right? These are all earthenware jugs. We have the story with a barrel or a earthenware jug, that was at the Amid base now, which cracked open lengthwise. Idriel guy, however, a guy went and he quickly went to save the contents, the wine, whatever the wine was in there, and he quickly, pushed it, held it together. Chavka, he embraced it, he embraced it to hold it together. Shari Papa. Again, Rav Papa was matzeret. Again, Shari always means that, or usually means that he allows you to drink from it. Why? Because here, even though it was kocha, but it was certainly lo b'kavana. He was just trying to save the wine. So you can tell from the incident, from the story, that he was just trying to save the wine, that it was going to be Tame Rav Huna, Braden Rishua. So Rav Papa, we'll see. He didn't say Shari. I stopped too soon. It says Shari Rav Papa allowed what? Tame Rav Huna, Braden Rishua, that he allowed it. Lezvuna. He didn't say you could drink it, but you could sell it. Again, that means you could have a gnaw, but you can't drink it. That's only if it broke open lengthwise. In other words, the guy really held it together. Without the guy having grabbed it, all the wine would have fallen out, all the liquid would have fallen out. So the guy really held it together. But since there was no kavanah there, so he said, okay, you're allowed to have a gnaw from it. But let's say it broke open crosswise, meaning across on its width. And so therefore, what happened? He just put the top back on. It broke there, and he held the top down. Afilu b'shtiya shar, then you can even drink it. So he made this nafkamina again between the second and third levels. Not osir bano, it's mutar bano, osir to drink. But if it broke open widthwise, and therefore the guy just held the top down on it, then he allowed it even to drink. My time and my levena of it. All he was doing was levena. All he was doing was like a brick. In other words, he was simply holding it down, like pushing it down, and that wasn't really certain. In both cases, he wasn't touching it. Then he says you're even allowed to drink it. However, there was a guy that was found. There was a guy found at the wine press. The wine press had no wine in it. No question about the wine. He was just there in the wine press. Now, what do? If the wine press itself was wet, there was wet there, and it could have, if you touched it, it would have made your hand wet. Then boy hadocha. It requires really real cleaning. What we mean by that? Boy hadocha needs rinsing. Uboy nigav also needs drying. And Rashi says, what do you mean by drying? Rashi right before the Mishnah says, Afer umayim be'afer. You've got to treat it this way. You put in some ashes, and then you put water, and then you put more ashes. It's got to be dried out to be completely cleansed. It needs this. If it's wet, again, there's no wine in there now. The question is it also because he's touching it or whatever? He's going to make it put some treif in there, or if you put wine in it afterwards, is it going to? He might have touched that wetness, and the wetness could have then, it had some residual wine in there. There was no wine in there, but it was still wet from the wine. So if he touched it and then you put wine in, could have been a problem. So he says, if it's a little bit wet, then you have to really clean it. Both rinsing and drying it out in the manner we just described. And if it's not wet at all, then it's enough just to rinse it out, and you don't have to have this drying process of the afer and the mayim and then the afer again. Says the Mishnah. A guy was standing next to your wine vat, your pit of wine. Now, the concern, of course, is that he stirred it. Listen to this. If the guy had a lien on your wine, like you had borrowed the wine, so to speak, from him, or you owed him the value of that wine, on that particular wine, then it's usher, because the guy is not afraid to touch it, explains Rashi, because he says, listen, even if he gets caught in it, he could say, it's my wine. What's your problem? It's mine. In other words, you owe me this wine anyway, right? It's a Jew's wine in the Jew's bore, but he owes it. He has a lien. The guy has a lien on that particular wine. The Mishnah doesn't say on that particular wine. The Gemara is going to explain that. Right? It's not a bor. Im yesh lo milva lav aser, because he's not afraid. It says Rashi, first Rashi in the Mishnah. Im yesh lo milva Yisrael aser lefi shelo yoreh liga. He's not afraid to touch it. The Safra Yomili mid, if he says anything on me like Tanu b'chovi, you owe it to me. I have a lien on this wine. You owe me the money. The wine's worth $1,000. You owe me that $1,000. So pay me. Well, if you have a problem that I touched it, fine. Then I'll just keep the wine. Then it's also ain't no milvala. But if he doesn't have a lien on it, in other words, he didn't lend any money to the Jew, and the Jew gave him that as a collateral, gave him the wine as a collateral, then it's mutter because the guy is afraid to touch it. Because if he is seen touching it, he'll say, hey, you ruined my wine, pay me for it. So then it's mutter. You're mutter even to drink it, apparently. Right? That's what the Mishnah says. Let's say another case, and we're going to come back and talk about this first case about the loan. We're going to talk about that in the Gemara. Nafal a bore. Let's say a guy fell into a bore. He drowned in the bore. He drowned in the bore. He fell into a pit of wine, a vat of wine, and he drowned in there. And they brought him out. So you assume he died in there, and it's going to be mutter. It's not also. Mutter to bakar. Let's say the guy didn't touch the wine directly, but he was measuring the wine with a stick of some sort, like a measuring stick. Or he saw a hornet or a fly go into the wine and he tried to get it out. He took some sort of a stick, a spoon or something, tried to get it out. Bukana with this with a stick, a reed or whatever. He saw a barrel of wine, again, an earthenware barrel of wine that was foaming at the top, like boiling or fermenting. There was bubbles, and he put his finger on there to push the bubbles down. There was a story, but you could sell it, you could have enough from it. Again, you can't drink it, the middle stage. You can't have enough from it. You could have enough from it, you can't drink it, but you could have enough from it, you could sell it to a guy. You could have enough from it. In all these cases. Rav Shimon Matur. Shimon says it's even mutter to drink. We'll see, we don't pass like Rav Shimon. Okay. Natal esachavis, the zarko b'chama. So let's say he took a barrel, the guy, we said before, when a guy pours the wine, you have to assume it's yain nesach. Let's say he threw it, he got angry and he threw it, labor, they were matter it, and they said it's even mutter apparently to drink. Rashi says, you're allowed to drink it because he didn't have kavanah in that case. Certainly he was angry. So when he was angry, he certainly was not thinking about yain nesach and like. So all these are many, many different cases. If you look at the chart, you'll see many, many cases how the Gemara comes out. Amr Shmuel. In the first case, where the Jew owed the guy money, right? So he said if the Jew owed the guy money, then the guy is not afraid to touch the wine, and therefore it's also if he's standing there. Amr Shmuel, also yayin. Only he has a loan on that particular wine, not a general loan outstanding, but on that particular wine. Amr Rabashi Mastis Namideki. You see it in the next mission as well. Take a look on Samach Aleph, tomorrow's daf. The Mishnah, the beginning of the daf is the Mishnah. So we'll learn the Mishnah now, just because because it'll help us understand this Gemara. First, the Mishnah says from the top of the page, Samach Aleph, Hamatar Yain Shalev. Let's say you are using a guy's wine press. You're making wine in his wine press, and you're keeping it kosher. You had it kosher and everything. But also, and then you leave the wine in his possession. But in other words, you leave it in a place. It's in the guy's possession. You owe him the money. You haven't paid him yet for it, right? You used his facilities, and it's your wine, but you really owe him for it still. And you left the wine in his house, and it's a place where it's visible from Rishus Rab, like it's open, like there's open windows there, people could see. Or even if there's Jews and Goyim in the same city, mutter, you're allowed to drink that wine. Why? Because the guy's not going to touch it because he's afraid people could see him. The window's open. If it's all Goyim there, also because even if the window's open, nobody's gonna rat on him, right? If there's Jews in the city who can side, they're going to be he's going to be afraid that they're going to take, he's going to hold me responsible for causing him the loss of the wine by me touching it. But if there's only goyim there, then it's usher. Until he sits there and guards it. He doesn't have to sit there the whole time 24/7. Even though he comes in and out. In other words, many times you have mashkiach like that. If the mashgiach is always available to come in and go out, it doesn't have to be where the guy, he's sitting there watching the guy the whole time. When it comes to many ashkachas, we call that yotze b'nechtas is good of mutter. We'll talk about that in tomorrow's Gemara, what Rav Shimon Elazar is trying to tell us. Here's the part that we're really interested in. Hamatar yaino. Now Rashi learns that the these two cases are connected. Let's say, again, what do you mean purifying the guy's thing? You're making wine in the guy's premises, and you left it with him till you pay him. And the guy writes him a shtar to say, you paid me already. He gives him a shtar, like a receipt. He hasn't paid him yet. The Jew hasn't paid for the guy, but he writes a receipt like that. Then it's mutter, because the guy is not going to touch it. He's afraid to touch it because it's like his, because it's like the Jews, and he's afraid that he'll be held responsible. But if the guy says, listen, no, you're not taking the wine until you pay me for it. That means that I have a lien on this wine. If the Jew wants to take the wine and the guy doesn't let him because he hasn't really paid for it yet, then and he doesn't let him until he pays for it. Say we have a couple of stories at Beit Shan. That's where the rabbis were sitting and they asked it. Why? Because in that case, the guy has a lien on the wine, right? The guy says, listen, you made the wine, but I'm not giving it to you until you pay me for it, right? You made the wine in my premises, you used my grapes, etc., right? You made it all kosher. You had a good hashgacha there and everything, but you haven't paid me yet. So in a case like that, that's what our Mishnah means here. Now back in our Mishnah on Samacham Beis, so he's standing there. And Shmuel said in the Gemara, beginning of the Gemara after the Mishnah, he had a lien on that wine. But if it was on other wine or on anything else, another standing alone, no, then it's not also, because the guy would be afraid to touch it because he would have a law, because the Jew could then make a claim against him. But if the guy has a lien on that wine, he's not afraid to touch it because he says, listen, you think I ruined your wine? Fine, I'll keep the wine. You haven't paid me yet. We see this in the Mishnah on Samachal that we just quoted. He's making the wine in a kosher manner in the guy's premises, and he left it in the rishus of the guy. And the guy writes to him, gives him a receipt. It's gabatim chamos. In other words, he didn't yet pay for it yet, but he writes it to him. In Rashi says, "Im kosid lo avchamis gabatim chamos klomer hareini keilu gabatim mos." That means it's like you paid me already, so you can take it whenever you want it. Then it's mutter. Why? Because the guy has no claim on the wine, and therefore, if he touches it, he's going to be held responsible. But if it's in the case of Yisrael, but if the guy will not let the Jew take it out until he pays for it, so what do you see here? The reason why it's what? It's also is because he doesn't let him take it out, so the guy has a lien on it, and the guy says, it's like my wine until you pay for it. But if he would let him take it out, shari. In other words, if you let him take it out, even if he has another loan, even if the Jew owes the guy money for some other loan, for something else, no, then it's mutter. So you see that it's only because he had a lien on that wine. But if he didn't have a lien on that wine, he had a lien on something else, on his house or on some other thing that he had him for, then it would be mutter, even though the Jew owes him money. So the point is, you see, is that the only time that the wine is usher is if the guy had a lien on that particular wine. So you could say it's mine. If you think I ruined it, I'll keep it myself. But if he didn't have a lien on that wine, the Jew just owed him other money, it would be mutter to drink that wine. It would mutter that wine because the guy is afraid to touch that wine. Nafal barbala. So we said in the Mishnah that if a guy fell into the pit of wine and he drowned, then it's mutter. Amra Papa. What do you say mutter? Well, really, the Mishnah said, he didn't say it's mutter because the guy did touch the wine, right? He touched the wine before he died. So it's not, you can't really drink it, but it's mutter by no. Because you know that he didn't have enough, he was just trying to save himself and he drowned. Amra Papa when they brought him up dead. He died, he drowned. But let's say they got him out. They threw him a rope or something and he got out of there alive. Then it's also to drink. You can't even have my time or Papa, the dummy like he made him. He was so grateful for being saved that he probably thanked his God for it, right? And on his way up, as he was in, he stirred the wine and he made Yayin Nesach thanking his idol for saving him. Let's say the guy didn't touch the wine, but he moved it, right? He measured it as he was measuring it with a reed or a stick or all these other things. He touched it. He's trying to get a fly out of there. Rav Shimon should have like a bracha, like you say, a bracha of 9 cup. He had a bracha on his head. Why? because he's very clear. When he says it's mutter, he says you're even allowed to drink it. It's very simple. He doesn't have a middle stage of you're allowed to have enough, but you can't drink it. It's either mutter, and it means mutter you could drink it, or it's usher, and you can't even have enough. It's very, very clear. It's like a nice drasha. Because when he says usher, when he says mutter, you can even drink it. He said in these cases where the guy fell into the bore and died, or and they brought him out dead, or he measured it, he touched it with a stick or something, he was measuring it or getting a fly out of there, or he was just touching it to get rid of the bubbles, whatever on top. Then he says it's even mutter to drink. Amar Rav Chibrei Rav Nachmani, Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Rav Amila, Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Zeiri. Halach Rav Shimon, halach like Rav Shimon. Economy, some say Amar Rav Chisda, Amali Abba Rav Chanan, Hachi Amar Zeiri, halach Rav Shimon. Many opinions say halach like Rav Shimon. The Gemara Paskins, ein halach Rav Shimon. The halach like Rav Shimon. We go lechumra, and you can sell it. You could have anah, but you can't drink it. Not l'chavos v'zarka v'chamaso lebor zeh ma'asav Shiro. If a guy took a barrel and he was angry, he took the barrel, even though he moved, when he poured it, we said before, if you poured from the barrel into your beaker, into your cup, whatever, then you're afraid that he was menasachet. But if in a fit of anger, he took it and threw it, there was a mice like that, and they were machshurid. What do we mean machshurid? Machshur, Rashi said, v'kshurat b'shtiya, can even drink it. Amar Rashi. Now, we're getting to another area here of a zav. A zav or a zava, a man who had gonorrhea or whatever, or a woman who had 3 days of emissions between the neither periods, anything that they touch is tamei. Now, there's another halacha that anything they move is tamei, right? If they move something was on their back, or they pushed it without touching it, that also is matam. But we're not talking about that here. Rashi says we're not talking about there. When a zav moves something, it becomes tamei. Here we're talking about a guy touching the wine. Right? When a guy is menasach the wine, if you know he's menasach the wine, then it's for sure also you have to destroy it. Right? But we're talking about where he moved it with his hand, he touched it. As we saw before, if it's a closed barrel or a closed canteen or whatever, that's not there. That's not the derech of being menasach the wine. Here we're talking about where the guy touched it. So he says, whenever a zav touches something and that's tamei because he touched it, the same thing by a goy touching it makes the ayin nesach. In other words, the rules of a zav touching something. Now, what do you mean? If he touched it, he touched it. What's the issue? The issue is where a zav touched something through by using an intermediary like a stick or a reed or something like that. So wherever the rule is that if a zav touched something even by an intermediary indirectly, it's tamei. The same rules apply that an Ovid Kechavim touched something indirectly. It makes the ayin nesach. Like we just said, we said not the chavas. Well, we're going to talk about like the cases of where he fell in there or he used a stick to move something wine there. That makes the ayin nesach. Kol shebezav tar. If a zav touched it in an indirect way, so indirectly that it's tar, that it's pure, that it's not the tamei, then in other words, it's a question of is it directly, indirectly, or how indirectly it is. And Rashi says in the second line of Rashi. First line Rashi just said we saw in the Gemara that we pass in the Gemara paskins the halacha is not like Reb Shimon. But the second line in Rashi in the wide lines, Rashi says Reb Shimon behesed. We're not talking about where he's just moving klal. Ela b'magav lo asla shmina ela zorak b'avi kachavim, that if a guy threw something, the lo aser. V'achikamer kol magav shebezav tamei kigam mechiburim ben biyaro ben mekana, touch something via an intermediary. Shira comes up vayayin vukli or other metame. Bezav afayayin as b'kach yayin nesach. Could go on automatic bezav ben shnagov bezav. If he touched him or he touched him indirectly through an intermediary, and that would be tamei. If the wine was touched by another kachavim in that indirect way, also it would be tamei. Right? So Rashi just says we're not talking about hesed because that wouldn't apply here because hesed applies to a zav, to a goy, to a zav, but doesn't apply to a goy. Here we're trying to say Rashi is trying to give you a rule. Anything any indirect touching for which a zav would be matame it, zav's indirect would be matame it. The same thing by a goy touching the wine would make it yayin nesach. Any indirect which is so indirect that if a zav did it, it's tar, then the guy wouldn't make yayin nesach. Okay, but now the Gemara has cash from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah just said that if a guy threw it in anger, right, then it's tar, then you could drink it. But mashma not in anger, not esvei. Esvei from Rashi, you say this is the general rule. Our Mishnah said, if he took the earthenware jug, and he threw it in anger. The boy threw it in there. So and they said you could even drink the wine because he didn't touch the wine, and he certainly didn't stir it for avodah zarah because he took it in anger. Only if he did it in anger. But if he did it not in anger, and he just threw it, that would be like pouring it, stirring it, even though he didn't touch it. That would be usher, right? Yet we say, says Rashi in the last line of Rashi on the page, Al Mazarak wasn't not matamic. If he touched it, if he threw it. Now again, we're not talking about hesed. We're talking about like a zav touching it or moving it in some way like that. Not moving it, but touching it indirectly. If a zav threw it, chevetz in a kli, he's not matamic yet. So you see that the rule is not the same. Here you see about an ovikam who threw the earthenware vessel that had wine in it, not in anger, then it wouldn't be mutter. It would be usher. It would be considered yayin nesach. And yet, if a zav threw the barrel, then we say it's not tamei. So it's not the same. The rules are not the same. Gemara says no. Hasam and samachav hasam the kaosel minei uminei. No, there Rashi does the top Rashi. He didn't throw it. He is rolling it. He's throwing it. When we say he threw it, it doesn't mean he picked it up and he threw it in the air directly. He rolled it. In other words, he didn't just throw it away. We're not saying that if he threw it in anger, we say that it's not tamei. But if it wasn't in anger, it is tamei. You know why? Because he didn't really throw it. He was rolling it. So if he was rolling it all the way, then you're afraid that maybe he touched it. We don't, it's not mutter. It's not mutter, it would be usher. We're concerned that maybe he touched it. So thereby, by the wine, when the guy threw the bar into the barrel, not in anger, but he was still rolling it, so he might have touched it. We're concerned there. But if a zav was moving it in the same way, he would also be tamei. So the things are comparable. But the difference would be if you're talking about throwing it like you're throwing a football, and he took the barrel and threw it in there. By a zav, taka would not be tamei, and by an ovikachavim could be that it would be tamei. But we're not talking about that particular case, right? Or it could be that we're not talking about throwing it at all. We're talking about only rolling it. So if a guy rolled it and not in anger, it would be tamei because maybe touched it. In the same way that a zav rolled it, it would be tamei. So the two things are comparable. Whenever for a zav it's tamei, for ovikachavim it would also be yayin nesach. Whenever for a zav it's not tamei, then for ovikachavim it wouldn't be yayin nesach. All right, tomorrow's Mishnah is here on. We already saw the Mishnah. The key is that if you make wine in a guy's premises, kosher, the best hashgacha, but you made the wine and you kept it in his property. So the first part of the Mishnah, remember there's two dots in the Mishnah, but the Rashi relates the two cases. The first part of the Mishnah we say that if it was visible to the street, right, visible street, and there's Jews in that area, even though there's goyim also, then you could drink the wine because you assume he's afraid to touch the wine, Rashi in the Mishnah here says, and this Mishnah says, that we're speaking about that he wrote a Skavalti, and the question is, did you have a lock? Did you have your own lock and key protecting your wine on his premises or not? So Rashi on Amid Beis, on today's Daf on Samid Beis, said it's mutter to drink if you have a key or a seal or something like that, the Ad Yisrael. Rashi over here on Amid Aleph says, no, you don't have that. So Tosas explains, and the Bach quotes Tosas, that we're speaking about if it's open to the street and people could see it, even Jews could see it there, then you don't need a lock and a key because the guy will be afraid to touch it because he's going to be afraid that somebody's going to see him. In the latter part of the Mishnah, where it talks about that the guy wrote him a receipt that it's yours and all that, there if he didn't, there was something where you didn't, it wasn't visible to the street. So there, that's what Rashi refers to, says that it's mutter to drink, right? If he number one, the guy has a lien on it, but he wrote on it, you could take it whenever you want, and you have a lock and key on it to make sure that he didn't touch it. So the lock and key Depends on the case. If it's open to the street, then you don't even need the lock and key. If it's not open to the street, but he gave you a receipt and said take it anytime you want, it's only mutter, as Rashi said, if there's a key or a seal on it, so you know that the guy didn't touch it. All right, we'll pick it up here tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem, on Daf Samach Aleph.
Why the analogy between Dove and
To teach you, if you know the halachos of Zav, you want to apply it, you want to get a general rule. You know what I'm saying? In the case where a Zav, if you know the halachos of Zav very well. No, why? It was just an example because it works out. The Zav, in terms of touching, not in terms of moving, the Zav's rules about touching are the same as the guy's rules about touching.
So
So I
without
thought, you know
from
what?
one to another.
No, he's just as a simon, to know, right? It's not teaching you point. It's just telling you it's as a simon.
Sure.
Yeah, beautiful.
This is Rashi's business. He knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
He was a winemaker.